Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this first of our Facebook Live sessions for the long-term plan. Thank you very much for joining us either as we do this live or watching the recording later. I'm Gary Kircher, Mayor for Waitaki, and beside me I've got Josh Rendell, who's the Infrastructure Manager, and I think people might want to know, what does that cover? Josh?
My role essentially looks after the operations of council's infrastructure, being its roading network, its water network, wastewater network, stormwater network, parks and recreation.
And it's a new role that's been brought in with transformation, where it sits across what previously were quite separately run departments.
Yes, that's correct. We've brought those together to try to get some more synergies in the way that we deliver some of our contracts.
Thank you for that. So this evening we are going to be talking about coastal erosion generally, but obviously specifically at the moment we've got the issue around Beach Road, and that's a topic that we're going to be launching in our consultation document, asking questions from the community around what they want to see. This session's really about informing people as much as possible about the situation, the issues that we face, the costs that we face, and all of the different things that the councillors and I have to take into account when we make decisions on these particular items. With us this evening, we've also got Mandy McIntosh, who's overseeing the long-term plan process, and Mandy's going to keep an eye on the questions coming in through the Facebook page and make sure that we get fed those particular questions and get an opportunity to respond to them. This is scheduled to go until 8 o'clock. We have had previous sessions where they have gone past the finish time. We're hoping we can get this wrapped up pretty much by 8, which is helpful for not only us but for you who are watching it. So anyway, let's get into the topic itself. So starting with the broader coastal erosion issue, it's a problem we've had for a long time. Erosion has been happening forever. There do seem to be more storm events and things that are causing greater erosion, king tides and the like. So it is causing problems. It's causing more than ever, and the cost of protecting against that is something that is quite significant, whether it's around Oamaru and the harbour area or down the coastline. It's costly enough to protect our own council infrastructure on behalf of the community, where we have requests from the community to protect private assets or assets that are owned by others. It's been a very difficult situation because we just don't have the funding to do that. So if we go into perhaps first of all talking about some of those erosion problems, some of the different issues that we are facing at the moment and have faced in recent years, and what the outlook is for the future. Josh, you want to cover off that perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. I think erosion's been an ongoing issue for the Waitaki district and Oamaru specifically since kind of the birth of our town. I mean, looking back to the establishment of the breakwater in order to be able to protect the harbour area, it was essentially whilst making a fantastic port space for ships to be able to come in a lot of ways it did protect a lot of the infrastructure that we have in that space from erosion. Council's been looking at how to deal with erosion for a number of years. I've been looking over some reports in preparation for this afternoon. Back to 2009, I've been reading a few reports where we've been trying to look at how we deal with erosion along some of our key infrastructure areas. It's been challenging because the answers are not easy. Protecting some of the infrastructure that we have is going to be quite expensive. I suppose this particular issue is cropping up again because in the next 30-year period we've got to make some really difficult decisions about whether we continue to try to protect the infrastructure that we have where it is, or whether we need to start relocating it away from some of the erosion potential lines.
So the pump station at Orwell Street is one of those. So it's an important part of infrastructure that takes all of the wastewater from, I guess, south of that point and pumps it out to Te Wai Duncan Road to the treatment plant. What's being done around that? How easy is that to relocate some fairly big infrastructure like that?
Yeah, yep, it is significant infrastructure. We've had a bit of a saving grace really because it's right by the Kiwi Rail yards there. So Kiwi Rail's been investing quite heavily in rock armouring to try to protect its own infrastructure, and just out of a bit of luck, we've managed to keep our infrastructure protected as well. That pump station does take in all of the sewage essentially from Kakanui and Western right down through all of South Hill out to the north end where it is treated at T.Y. Duncan, our treatment plant out there. There's some significant mains in that area, 600 diameter sewer rising mains, 40 mains, gravity mains, as well as the pump station itself. The estimates to relocate it are quite substantial, but less substantial than the cost of continuing to armour it. So far, this partnership with with Kiwi Rail's worked quite well, where they undertake the armouring, but we are having to chip in a little bit more than what we historically would have had to.
And when it comes to Project Reclaim, one of the reasons why we undertook that particular project was because of coastal erosion, of course, the challenge of some dump sites being exposed to the ocean. We saw what happened over on the west coast when that happened with the rivers ripping open dump sites there. We have done some protection previously with Hamden landfill. That was a dump. It's been upgraded to landfill, and so there's been expense already put into that particular one. I think maybe twice where we put some protection in, but certainly the decision was made that that it wasn't worth putting more money into that. We were better off to remove the all of the rubbish out of there, and then we had the 2 fly tipping sites on Beach Road as well. There was, I'm not sure of the total volumes that we ended up being found there, but there was a bit more than what was thought. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. So Hampton Beach Road, we've relocated all of the waste from there to the Palmerston landfill. One of the reasons for us to pursue this project now rather than waiting for later on was we did still have the consent open for Palmerston landfill, so we didn't need to take the historic waste outside of the district, which comes at a significant cost saving for the ratepayer, which is fantastic. The early indications on what we'd had from all of our site investigations, where we'd done some potholing and sampling and geotechnical investigations, indicated there'd be about 12,000 tonnes, of waste at the Beach Road north sites. Once we started opening up those sites and removing the waste that we needed to find, it ended up being about 19,000 tonnes. So about a 58% increase or thereabouts on what we had originally envisaged as being there. But important that we did remove it because it was, again, only a matter of time before it would have been taken into the sea and we would have ended up with a costly bill to remedy the situation, the same as the West Coast has had to suffer through.
Yeah, and I think it was reported at the time that we were doing the work with without knowing exactly the extent of it, and there was always a risk that it was going to be larger than expected. That Beach Road, I think it was, I recall it was expected that one site did go under the road, the other site didn't. But as it turned out, both sites did, and that's why we've ended up with a couple of big holes, a couple of big gaps in our roading.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. It was one site that we always knew would impact Beach Road, but the second site, and certainly the depth that it would go through the road was not anticipated at the time.
So I think important to go back to the couple of questions and comments that people have made around the total cost and why we didn't allow for reinstatement of the road. Was that simply that we didn't know the extent at that time to be able to quantify that?
Just before Mr. Rendell answers that question, sorry, we've just been given a message by some of our listeners that Josh is speaking a little bit too quiet, so if you can bring that microphone closer, thank you.
Good as gold.
Apologies, folks.
So, where were we? Essentially, the budget was set around 15 million. I think the waste levies increased over time, and well, certainly the volume meant that it's overall about 18 million. We did apply for government funding. Originally, we were not aware that there was any funding available from the government, from the Ministry for the Environment, and despite us talking to the government about this particular issue and actually going to Wellington and raising it as a topic along with the Timaru Mayor and CE, we raised it as an issue, and we weren't alerted that there was a fund there until there were some announcements that funding had been granted to a number of ones, including Timaru District. We missed out on the opportunity for Hampden Landfill, but we did put an application in for some of the beach road work, but don't think we've had any result out of that particular one that we're aware of.
Is that a question?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not an area where you've been involved in that, so I don't want to put you on the spot. But certainly I haven't had any feedback from Mr. Clark, who's overseeing the project, whether we were successful in getting any of that funding. Hopefully we are. The other part of it is there's over $5 million of waste levies that, according to government policy, is something that we're getting charged. We've talked consistently with the last government and the current government around the waiving of those levies, and there's some good indications that that'll happen, but at the moment we're still waiting on the outcome of that. It's just ridiculous to try and do the environmental thing, take all this rubbish out of the ground, recycle what can be recycled, put the rest back in the ground and be charged a levy for doing it. So it certainly doesn't make sense, and hopefully the central government that gets into gear and does get that levy waived, which will reduce that part of the bill for the Waitaki District Council. There's been a few comments just around engagement with the community on Project Reclaim and the issues, particularly around Beach Road. I know Councillor Thompson and I did have a meeting with some of the immediate neighbours, and that's something that we've talked to them about having another meeting sometime soon. Ideally, we'll get that done in the next couple of weeks, but do you want to make any comment about any of that engagement overall?
Yes, yep. So the Project Reclaim, we had done quite a lot of engagement with the community. Obviously, we had not anticipated that we'd be leaving the situation where we are. We didn't really have a decision about the future of Beach Road. Throughout our consultation process for the long-term plan, we'd always anticipated that we'd be talking with the community about whether we would have Beach Road North open in perpetuity or not, just because of some of the erosion issues that we are facing. There are some significant costs facing the community. When we delayed our LTP by 12 months and instead did an enhanced annual plan, it wasn't something that then came through for consultation with the community. And coupled with that, Project Reclaim has been completed far earlier than we'd anticipated, which is great from a cost perspective, but not so great from an engagement perspective. Certainly the surprise of finding a heck of a lot of additional rubbish there, which we didn't think would be there, is exacerbated the issue. But I think ultimately we could have done more engagement with the community, particularly with those neighbouring properties. But I did want to bring it to council first, foremost, just to see whether we would invest the additional funds to be able to reopen those sites so that we could actually talk to the neighbouring properties about what we'd be doing, or whether we would want to go out to consultation. And I think ultimately we are going out to consultation. That was the first clear message we could have given to anyone, rather than kind of having this shroud of ambiguity.
Yeah, there's been comments about the traffic management issue with what looked like quite permanent gates put on the road.
Yep.
Why?
Yeah. Yep.
Why so such solid structure?
Why so permanent? Yep. So whilst traffic management was handled by Fulton Hogan, who were undertaking Project Reclaim, we weren't incurring any additional cost for that. Essentially, the cost for that was all embedded within the contract itself. and they managed it in a way that best suited them logistically with the movements of trucks and machinery and so on and so forth. When the sites were being closed down, we weren't going to reopen Beach Road North immediately. We did some sums on what it would cost us to essentially ensure that temporary traffic management was in place and the constant regular checks that we need to do and the number of road cones we would have needed to be able to abide by the rules that the government set forward. It quickly became apparent that some more permanent structures such as the gates and fencing that we now have was actually the cheaper alternative rather than continuing with the temporary traffic management way. So we went down that route. Certainly didn't think it would cause as much concern for everyone as it did. It certainly wasn't intended to say that the road's going to be closed permanently. It was just a measure to try to save a little bit of money rather than having temporary traffic management, whilst we talked with the community about what we do with Beach Road North in the future, particularly around that, erosion issue.
Yeah, because we did see recently when we had the road next to Duntroon blocked off because of massive rock above it, and repeated behaviours, people moving cones, moving the blockages that were there until we put some rather massive rocks on the road, and so yeah, that was, I guess, a precedent for that sort of structure.
Yes, yeah, it was. We had temporary traffic management up, we had chains up, we had logs up, we had smaller rocks up, and people would continue to find ways to go around it and through it. But certainly I think what we've got now is hopefully robust enough that no one's going to try to drive Beach Road North because there's not much out there at the moment. There's a couple of holes.
Yeah. Okay, perhaps we go to Mandy and just see what questions are coming in. We have had some prior to this session, but also some have come in during the session itself.
Yeah, so I'll go to some of the questions that have come in during the live session and we can fill in with the other questions as we go along. So we've had a question that's come in. Can you please advise in your assessment, especially greater coastal erosion, on what basis do you measure this metric? You say it's increasing, but since when? Has that been the last 10, 50, 100 or 1,000 years? And is the current erosion issue something that our long-term plan needs to simply allow for rather than state any change in activity? Rather than state any change in activity, recent change in activity.
Well, I think the challenge we've got is that, and this has really been happening for probably the last 20 years or so, is that coastal erosion has been getting close to our infrastructure. So whilst it hasn't been as much of an issue previously, just get my phone off, it hasn't been is such an issue because we've had some leeway between some the ocean itself and where the infrastructure is. That's been eaten away, and increasingly there's the area under roads is actually being eaten into, and a number of ones. There's some photos on the Facebook page showing some of those situations. And when you get that sort of erosion, it's definitely a big issue and a real safety issue that someone could get killed quite easily. So I guess we've benefited from that gap in the past between our infrastructure and the sea. That's pretty much gone in a lot of places, and certainly along that Armagh Road through to the golf course to part of Beach Road, it's an issue. It's also a high cliff there, so any protection is going to be a lot more significant than perhaps south of Kakanui, where we have done some rock protection, and that's only been maybe 5 or 6 metres high, possibly not even that in places, but it's certainly a lot easier to do rock protection in those lower cliff areas. As far as the overall scale of erosion now versus back then, I think we know historically that different parts of the coast erode at different rates, and what doesn't erode for very much for 10 years can suddenly lose quite large chunks. So it's unpredictable. It is, regardless of whether it's more erosion than we've had or less, it's getting to the point where the expense of it, along with everything else that we have to do, is getting beyond reasonable cost. It has been the policy of council for the last 15 years, I think it is, to consider managed retreat in the situation of roads being eroded into. So that can mean just closing the road and using alternative routes. It can mean actually just relocating the affected road inland further. And when we look at the rates of erosion, it would make sense if you're going to have to build a new road that you put it well back, that's going to last ideally at least 50 years. As far as good management of infrastructure. So those are all costly options. They're building a new road, and it doesn't matter whether you build it 10 metres back or 50 metres back, apart from the land purchase, it's going to cost pretty much the same to build the road itself. Using an alternative route is a cheaper way. When the part of Beach Road got so eroded that we ended up closing it off and using Gardeners Road instead, there was a bit of cost to that because we ended up sealing Gardeners Road. It had been gravel road before that, and there was one property that had a driveway off the bit of road to be closed, and I think council contributed or paid for the new driveway in from Gardeners Road. So that was a solution that was able to be carried out without too much expense. And it is looking at how do we get the best value for ratepayers. Beach Road, no doubt, it's a wonderful drive along there, and it's not something we want to lose. Just to basically say we're not going to have that anymore. Too bad, so sad. It's something that we want to make sure that we really investigate, and obviously it's important enough for us to ask the community what their thoughts are, because it's going to be the community that ends up paying the cost. And it's not just that initial cost, it's going to be what is the cost of protection into the future. So how does, with asset management, Josh, how does the calculations around moving a road or rebuilding a road and the protection that might be needed over the next period of time, how's that worked out?
Great question. Generally, we try to rely as much as possible on construction estimates that we've received, or some of our partners such as NZTA or Target Regional Council, Waimate District Council, so on and so forth, have received for construction jobs. And that gives us some really good insight into what the approximate costs are going to be for some of the interventions we might need to make to either protect our infrastructure, renew our infrastructure, or relocate our infrastructure. If this was the situation where we were relocating Beach Road beyond the erosion potential lines. The numbers that we've used to come up with an estimate for the rock armouring to ensure that Beach Road North remains open between Gardeners Road and the golf club, rates that were received by NZTA for the work they did down at Kardiki Strait a couple of years back. The very, very similar situation, quite high cliff faces. The Beach Road North in sections is about 20 metres from the road point down to the beach, which is quite similar to what was experienced at Kardiki Strait along that section that they did. So they were probably the most appropriate estimates that we could use. And the design, I think, is something that would also work for Beach Road if that is the way that we went. Yeah,
there's I guess there's some lower bits where they have put some rock there, but a lot of rock protection has gone into the higher cliff parts. So yeah, not cheap. Andy.
Yeah, so we've got quite a few questions that are coming through at fast pace. So
better speed up.
Yeah. So one of the questions that you've partially answered before, so we may be able to, you just want to touch on it again, but why was Project Reclaim begun in 2024 to clean up historic dumping at local expense instead of seeking funding under government's ongoing contaminated sites remediation program, which made $6 million in grants in February 24 for 4 other dump sites in South Island? And then another person's also asked, why did we not apply for funding that government released last year? So maybe that's one that you want to approach. I know you've sort of talked about that a little bit, if we can just...
Yeah, well, just to reiterate what I said, we raised this with the government, the Labor government at that time, as being an issue for us. And it was Canterbury Mayoral Forum, went to Wellington, talked about a number of issues. This was one that was pretty hot for the Waitaki District Council and also Timaru District Council. We made them aware that not only were we faced with these environmental issues, that there were more councils who were going to be facing them in the future. We weren't, to all our knowledge, we weren't advised that they actually created a fund and applications were being made to that fund. And it was only when that $6 million of grants was announced that we found out, and I got in touch with our people and said, did we apply for this? And there was just not any knowledge that that fund was there. However, we were only into the Hampden part of the project, so there was still an opportunity to apply for funding for the part that hadn't been started, which was Beach Road, and that's the bit where we're not sure whether we've had a response on that. Hopefully we have. So between that and between the waiving of the waste levies, those are two things that will reduce the overall cost. Everything else is pretty much, whatever the cost is being loan funded, because this is something that it's a historic issue. But it would be very difficult for just the current generation or current batch of ratepayers to pay for. So loan funding, it spreads it out over a wider number of ratepayers over time, and that's part of the use of loan funding. If we can reduce that cost, then that's great. If we do something with the road, then that will increase the cost up a bit, but again, it comes down to what value do people see in the spending of that money.
Thanks for that. So we've had another question, and another one similarly was received prior. So our local cost, I think you talked about this a bit before as well, has been reported as 18.35 million, of which 5.2 million is landfill fees, which might be waived by the government. And someone has also asked, why do we have to pay the ETS and waste levy, and will we get it back? And further to that, they've said how much of the cost that has been incurred was incurred because of the decision to continue removal of the waste beyond the original limits, up to about 50 metres away from the high tide lines that the beach road was severed in two places.
Well, I think if we're going to do the job, we need to do it properly. We had previously had two efforts at protecting the Hampden landfill, and that put off the need to remove any rubbish. Actually, one of it was taking away rubbish and putting rock lining on that part of the coastline. It was determined that actually we're better off to bite the bullet basically and take it all away. So doing it in stages it was an option, and it was tried, but from a cost effectiveness, it wasn't ideal. What was the other part to that question? Sorry, Mandy.
Sorry. It's just how much of that additional cost was incurred because of the decision to continue removal of waste beyond the original limits, up to about the 50 metres away, which severed the beach road in those two places. But I think you've covered that, and I think they covered as well. Well, the question that they asked previously was about the fees that may be waived by government, and someone asked, why did we have to pay the ETS and waste levy, and will we get it back?
So that it's definitely been the topic of conversation with a number of successive ministers for the environment, and we are optimistic that they are going to do something about it. Currently it's law. Currently the Ministry for the Environment has sent us the account for the initial stage or couple of stages of work that were done, so that's sitting in there. We haven't paid that. Our officers have worked with the Ministry for the Environment officers, and there's been an agreement that we will dispute the invoice, and that'll put it in a whole pattern while ministers get round to making decisions and changing the rules on that particular legislation.
Great, thank you. So I guess there's a more direct question. Who made the decision to continue the excavations so that Beach Road be severed, instead of stopping the excavation at that point and armouring the remaining waste area against future erosion? And there's actually a really simple question that's come through, but I guess it's a common question, is what kind of waste was actually in the site?
Okay, well, the decision was to do the whole project, and there wasn't any decision that it was going to stop wherever, at a particular line. It was going to the decision was to remove all of the waste. And we were hopeful that it wasn't going to affect the road, at least in one of those two spots on Beach Road, but obviously it did. As far as the other question, what was actually in there, I haven't seen an overall summary of what was able to be recycled out of there and what actually ended up going into Palmerston landfill. Josh, do you have that detail?
I don't have that level of detail, no. Certainly I can tell you that from all of the sampling that we'd done, there was a lot of material that was contaminated. There were some concerns about how much remediation we'd have to do once it was located at the landfill because of the level of contamination. It wasn't quite as bad as what the early results had come through, but I'm not exactly sure what material was. No.
Yeah, so the landfill was pretty well prepared, so it could take a reasonable amount of contaminated waste, but I think if it was things like asbestos was found in there or heavy metals and so on, that was possibly...
Yeah, we'd have to do some additional treatment at the site there.
Yeah. I think it is a really good question. I think a lot of people would like to know. So if we can find that detail out and post it separately, then we'll do that as a bit of information for the public generally. Mandy, another one.
Great, yes, so just on the same topic of there are a few other questions that have come through around range topics around the pump station and other things, but one person's just asked whether we can designate that coastal road significant natural area for geopark and then apply for national funding to protect and maintain it, designate the significant asset it is for tourism and infrastructure, highlighting geopark attractions around the road.
We're struggling to get the government to fund anything around the geopark, to be fair, as much as it's a national treasure, in that we've got a UNESCO Global Geopark. The government's not quite seeing that as part of their role. So we keep working with them on how they can assist funding different parts of the operation there. But at the moment, we're like a lot of other parts of New Zealand. We're on our own on this one. If we can get some funding, it'll be really around that assistance to remove the waste. It's not going to be around reinstating the road. There might be some NZTA funding that would get used. I'm not sure what program it might fit under. Josh, there's all different designations of programs.
Yeah. Potentially. There is some funding that's made available cyclically for coastal resilience. Generally, that is, when we apply for that kind of funding, we do need to do a whole lot of calculations to determine what a net present value for the particular infrastructure we're working on is. In the case of Beach Road, I think it'd be a little bit uncertain as to whether it would pass the NPV test that's required, purely because we do know that there is significant erosion that's going to occur, and there are a number of inland routes that are probably less costly, certainly from NZTA's perspective, but potentially more efficient from a travel perspective, but not from a amenity perspective. I think everyone values Beach Road a lot because of the amenity that provides. It's one of the great coastal routes which is slowly dwindling away.
Thank you.
So we've got another question. Why was the cost of road reinstatement not budgeted for as part of the project, inferring that a decision had already been made by council officers? And I guess slightly related to that, why do we have to do this now?
I'll say my wee bit and then go to Josh for the expert opinion. Initially, we certainly didn't know what the extent of any damage or impact on the road would be. There was certainly the expectation that one of the sites was going to affect the road, and that the hope was that we would be able to just rebuild that road back where it was and fill that hole in. It ended up the hole was much bigger than expected, and obviously the other site was of a similar nature and was going to be cutting off the road. So there was, without digging into the thing in the first place, we didn't have an indication of what the state of the excavation would be, what the scale of that would be. So that is fundamentally the problem. There was an expectation that there would be, of the overall budget, that if we got waste levies back, then there's the possibility for putting some of that towards reinstatement of the road, but obviously the reinstatement's going to cost more than what we're expecting, and we do have to take into account what the future cost of that road will be, and particularly, as I said before, Omar Road through to the golf course being a much more difficult and much more undercut area of road as well. I think from Omar Road through to Old Bones, that area is a bit better. We've certainly got a bit more road reserve, I think, to work on in there if we were to still keep it within the road reserve. Equally, there's a discussion that could be had with neighbours around gaining a bit of land off their property, but that's normally something where there's compensation paid, and it's a totally different discussion that we've got to have on that one. So, Josh,
Yep.
Did I cover that all right?
Yeah, I think so. Yep. I suppose, just to tongue-tied. Reiterate the comments from earlier on, where I talked a little bit about the timing of the project and the intention to have a discussion with the community through the long-term plan about the permanence or how long we continue to invest in rock armouring to keep Beach Road North open. It wasn't anticipated that we'd be severing the road at two different locations through a project reclaim. But either way, we wanted to have a discussion with the community about how much we're willing to invest to be able to keep that road open in perpetuity. The timings, as I said, didn't quite work out. The project reclaim happened a little bit faster than what we'd anticipated, and last year we did an enhanced annual plan rather than a long-term plan, so weren't able to consult with the community last time round. Because project reclaim did happen a little bit earlier, we weren't in a position where we could make a decision one way or the other. And certainly finding that additional waste, more than what all of the earlier testing had indicated, meant that we consumed a lot of the budget's contingency, which would have been put towards the reinstatement of the road.
Thank you.
That's great, thank you. So one question has come through: how did the waste actually get under the road surface when the road's been in the same place since 1939? Do you know also what the surface area of the Palmerston landfill is, and how much clay capping did the landfill require, and where did that clay come from? There's a lot in that. Do you want me to start with the first bit? How did the waste get under the road surface when the road has been in the same place since 1939?
I don't know when the road was put there, but I do know that there's people that have living memory of the material going in there. But whether that was post the road being there and the road was put there when someone was already in there, I don't know. And then there's been fly tipping there that's carried on after that. I just don't know the history, and I'm not sure whether you've got that. Any info on that, Josh?
It's certainly before my time with council, but I do know that the road was rerouted in the roughly the 70s, and it was actually rerouted over the waste-filled gully. So the fly tipping sites had essentially filled up a gully, and then the road was rerouted over the top of them.
Thank you. So the second part of that, I'm not sure if you know, what was the surface area of the Palmerston landfill, and how much clay capping did the landfill require, and where did that clay come from?
That's not something I've got the detail on, sorry. I know that, so we opened up an additional cell at the Palmerston landfill to be able to take the waste from Hampden and Beach Road to that location. That was all included in the total cost of Project Reclaim. We haven't yet closed the landfill. I believe the consent for that one expires in 2027. So we're currently going through a closure process, coming up with a closure management plan, essentially. A lot of the finer detail about clay capping and where the clay will be sourced from will be detailed through that process. I'm not entirely sure where the material to cap the current waste has been sourced from.
That's fine. We can actually probably get back to that question later on that, once we talk to our waste team tomorrow on that one. So thank you.
Yeah, we did do a site visit when they were just preparing that area, and it was very roughly like a football field, between a half football field and a football field of area that was exposed and being prepared as a cell. So essentially clay lined, had a rubber or whatever lining given to that, and then the material's been put in on top of that, and then it will be further lined and capped above that with with clay and soil, and basically never to be built on again, but will be probably grazed by stock, some such use. So yeah, we'll check whether the clay was sourced on site, or I don't know that it was brought in.
Yes, actually, we've just had some information that's just been received to say that the clay capping did come from the Palmerston site as part of remediating the original landfill and developing the new landfill cell. No clay was removed from Beach Road for the Palmerston site, so thank you to our team offline.
Yeah.
So further to that, we have a question that's come through. Are there any more landfill sites along Beach Road that could pose a risk later, either north or south of Kakanoe?
Not that I'm aware of, and I hope not.
Yeah, there's. I think these are surprises that are popping up. Some are perhaps locally known issues, but surprises possibly to councils at times. No guarantees that there aren't further sites. At some stage, the Kakanoe landfill itself will be affected, I would expect, and it's certainly that. I recall when I was quite a bit younger, going to the Kakanoe dump as it was then, and it being quite an active site as far as the situation there. Obviously, there is the road between the sea and that, but yeah, if the cost of protecting that road becomes too great in the future, then that's an issue. So, not an easy one to deal with. That's not a decision we're making today, thankfully. Yeah, we've just got to deal with what we've got in front of us, because it's every single one of these is a costly situation.
So another question related to the same thing is there even room to allocate Beach Road inland in the places where the rubbish has been removed from?
So I think that question is about whether we've got space to be able to realign the roads within the existing road reserve that we have around the holes where rubbish has been removed. Yes, there is. So some early concept survey that we've done to be able to come up with the estimates that we've got to realign the road do show an alignment that essentially skirts around where the holes currently are, that is within road reserve. That obviously doesn't resolve the issue of having to protect Beach Road contiguously from erosion. Relocating inland is going to buy us a fair bit of time. If we were to have to relocate more of Beach Road inland from the current alignment than just around those 2 points where it's been severed from Project Reclaim, we would need to take some additional land.
Thank you for that. So we do have a number of other questions that have been received regarding Beach Road. We've also got some that have come through regarding pump station and wider infrastructure. So we might just head there, not being aware of time, and we'll see how we go as night proceeds. But one question's come through. In 2018, Council released its 30-year strategy for infrastructure, covering the period from 2018 to 2048. How thorough was that document? Because was it done as a tick box exercise to keep central government happy? Because if the process to arrive at that final document had been done properly, why wouldn't the issue with the pump station and Regina Lane not have been forecast at that time and allowed for? And then why was the possibility of loss of coastal eroding and remediation not identified at that time? He said, I repeat, the production of that 30-year document, was it just a waste of time and money? We're only barely 7 years into that 30-year period, so I'd be interested in your comments.
They mentioned Regina Lane, but that's a water pumping station that takes the water up to the reservoir, as far as I know, and I don't. It's on the right side of the railway line.
Yeah, the water pumping station's at Redcastle Road. We do have another sewer pump station at Regina Lane.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
But the one that we're probably talking about at the moment that's been more of an immediate threat is at Orwell Street. Yep.
And the Orwell Street one, I think it was expected that that Kiwi Rail would continue its protection of that area, because obviously their infrastructure's there. I think when we did lose a bit of land there, there was a joint effort between us and Kiwi Rail to put some more protection in. And what's the long-term prognosis for keeping the pumping station there, or moving it?
Yeah, so Not to comment on reports undertaken previously, but certainly these two particular issues were looked at in the formulation of our infrastructure strategy for our long-term plan this time around. So we began kind of looking in detail in around 2023 around some coastal erosion issues, because we have been seeing some of those issues come through and become costly for council. And obviously we knew that it was only a matter of time before we'd have to deal more widely and more significantly to be able to retain the infrastructure where it is. Historically, we have been in that position where Kiwi Rail have been quite happy to undertake a lot of the rock protection at their own cost. We're moving into a situation now where Orwell Street was threatened in recent years from one of the recent weather events, and to protect our asset we did need to put in some funding within Kiwi Rail to be able to protect that asset. If the rock protection isn't done continuously as we need to, we will be in a situation within the next 30 years where that particular pumping station will have to be abandoned and relocated at a significant cost.
Yeah, I'd just say the infrastructure strategy plan is not a tick box exercise for the government. The government wouldn't know what an infrastructure plan is. To be quite honest, the Ministry of Health is only just getting on to developing a 10-year strategy for maintenance of their buildings. So local government is well ahead of them on that, but obviously there was some assumptions made that didn't see this work happening or needing to happen as early as this, but there we go. There's always going to be some surprises that do come along.
So we've also had another person who did actually mention the pump station at Regina Lane, and just asking, what about that as a concern, because the sea is approximately only 20 metres away from that currently. So just probably, I don't know if you've got any additional comment to make to that, Josh?
Yep. So the current erosion rates that we see, as Gary mentioned earlier on, some years we don't see a lot, and then other years we see quite a lot. We're losing roughly half a metre of coastline each year on average, it being about 20 metres back, the Regina Lane pump station that is, from the coastline, and it means that we've probably got about a 40-year period before that will be imminently threatened. We do need to start thinking about what we do with that particular site, and there's a few other sites as well. Oamaru Wastewater Treatment Plant out at T.Y. Duncan Road is another one, where the erosion potential lines over the next 50 to 100 year period indicate that we'll have to deal with some coastal erosion issues out there as well. It's a challenge for council as a whole to be able to protect its infrastructure, and for our ratepayers where there is some residential property that may become threatened in time.
And just on that, it's a problem for councils, but it's a problem for central government as well. We did get a question in which made reference to Waitaki Boys High School and other areas like that. As locals will often know, the erosion that's been happening at Waitaki Boys High School has been considerable over the years. They've still got probably be estimated another 40 or 50 years before it starts getting to their buildings, and whether they start protecting or whether they just decide to move the buildings, who knows, but their pockets are much deeper than what our ratepayers' pockets are, and they are facing these same challenges. So that's the way it is at the moment, and if there's an affordable solution to the protection, then that's the ideal one, but in many cases there's just not.
So I will come back to that statement that you've just made, because there is a question relevant to that, but one person's actually asked a really good question. What actually is the impact of Orwell Street becoming inoperable?
As the first main pump station that receives all of the wastewater from South Hill, Kakinui, Western, so on back, we would essentially have some fairly significant overflows into the sea until the pump station was restored. We need that pump station to be able to essentially transport that wastewater on through the daisy chain of pump stations that we have until we get to T.Y. Duncan, our wastewater treatment facility. So without it, we're facing a bit of a big battle with sewage.
Thanks, Josh. I think that's really good to clear up. Well, the sewage too. But okay, so back to the comment that the Mayor was talking about before. Someone has also asked, assuming that a similar figure would apply to protect the rail corridor north of Oamaru past Waitaki Boys High School, and considering current government reluctance to commit to rail operations in the South Island, is there any likelihood that Waitaki District Council will ultimately be liable for all of our foreshore protection near our town boundary? And then there's comment that Karaki Beach State Highway 1 currently sits low and within 1 metre of the high tide mark. What moves are afoot to either protect or retreat from the beachfront?
Right. So the first one is that under any current legislation, there's no requirement for the council to protect private assets or non-council assets. Our priority is to protect council assets, which are obviously the pipes and roads and so on that serve our communities. And it very much is a case of, buyer beware for any owners of property near the coast. As far as, that last bit was the Karaki stretch of road. That's NZTA roads. Again, they've got deeper pockets than we have, but they are also tight for money. But they are really protecting not only their road, but also right next to that is the railway line. So the government has a very much vested interest in making sure that that connection stays through there. The options for alternate routes would be very costly, taking it away from the coast. So I don't think they'll be jumping to move the road inland at this stage. I think they'll be having to just get on and pay the cost of protection. But that's decisions that they've got to make.
So we've got a question here. Just, has council been in negotiations with the landowners beside Beach Road regarding realignment?
Not yet. That's something that I indicated earlier. I want us to be having a meeting with those neighbours. I have been in conversation pre-Christmas, and we've agreed that we need to have another discussion, and whether that includes how we might move the road, then that will be a discussion we need to have with them.
And that will all determine on what comes out of that consultation with our community. Which on that topic, one question that we did receive was, how come the council insists on doing public consultation on whether we reopen the road when it's clear what the community wants and needs?
Well, I think anyone reading through the comments understands that there's a bunch of people that do want it reopened, and seemingly regardless of cost, and then there are other people who recognise that we are fighting nature here, and the cost of doing that is not only expensive, it's ongoing. So, there isn't a clear response. What we want from people is to get an indication of, I think we know what the options are. We want to know what options they want to take, and we want them to give us the feedback with as much information as possible. And this is a cost that's going to go right across the whole district because it's roading, and roading is covered by everybody as an overall network. So it's going to impact. If we reinstate the road, we're going to have to find the money for that. That's either by putting up rates further, or it's going to be by taking money from other roading projects. And we all know that we struggle to keep up with the maintenance on existing roads now. So we've got a hard decision to make, and we want people's feedback because it is varied, and it's a good indicator. What do people who live in Kakanui think, who may use that road every day? What do people who may live nearby and just use it recreationally and for the amenity value of it? What do people who live in Palmerston or Lake Ohau think about it? So because they're going to help you pay for it as well. So those are some things. That's feedback that we want. So yes, we will get that feedback, and we will look at it and consider it. We will listen, and we will have to make a decision. That's going to be a difficult one, whatever decision that might be.
And we've received a few questions exactly on that, where there are some other ideas of what we could do with that hole that's currently there and what happens to the future of that area. And if suggestions being, can the hole be made into a beach access / car park and the road moved inland 20 metres? Or alternatively, would a cycle track from Aomoa to Kakanui be a more economical use of funds or easier to create? And then another person again's also asked, can a car park and beach access be made since there's already a big hole dug out there? So there's some great ideas. I don't know whether you wanted to talk to that at all, Josh, but yeah, great to receive those through submission process as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. It would be good to receive those through the submission process. Certainly the three options that we're going to be putting in our consultation document, essentially we're looking at the abandonment of Beach Road North between Gardeners Road or rather the bridge just by Gardeners Road there, and to the golf club or thereabouts, just where it's closed at the moment near the 17th hole of the golf course, and then an establishment of a cycleway along that route rather than keeping it open to motor vehicles. The other option is that we reinstate the entire length of Beach Road North and allow for the rock armouring that's necessary to ensure that the road remains there for the next 50-year period. And then the third option is a realignment around the intersection with Aomoa Road through to Gardeners Road and the protection of that section of road, but an abandonment of the section between Aomoa Road and the 17th hole of the golf course.
Thanks for that, Josh. So one of the previous questions that came through, they'd like a little bit more explanation. So they're referring back to the forecasting period. They said that your response appears to indicate the issues on Beach Road as though we're not framing, not doing anything similar to the removal of Beach Road near Gardeners Road. Surely you can't keep giving up current roads when you've said in writing that no decision has been made. If you don't want to lose it, then where are the revised cost projections to reinstate and project into the future? Have we called for QS or contractor prices? Because there is no asset as cheap as the ones that we already have.
Hole in the ground's not overly an asset, to be fair, but yeah, the consultation document, which is going out next week, does have some assessment of what the costs will be, including the long term cost of protecting if we do reinstate the road. So those are important bits that will be in there. There were some other parts to that. Do you want to cover anything else off?
I think, yeah, the comment was really, surely you can't keep giving up current roads when you've said in writing that no decision's been made. Yeah. If you don't want to lose it, then where are the revised cost projections? But you've just referred
So no decision's been made, but we do have a policy of managed retreat, basically. That is how we deal with erosion when it becomes too costly to keep armouring. So there's no decision, but there is a policy that sits in the background. What we want to do is make a decision on this particular bit of road. Is it valued highly enough that people want to pay the cost, the long-term cost of putting it back in place or moving it slightly further inland versus just using existing roads, as Josh has mentioned, or do we reinstate part of it or all of it? So yeah, there's some options in there and there's some costings in there with some fairly eye-watering figures because it is looking at the lifetime cost of it.
Thanks for that. So we've got just a question. We mentioned earlier that Project Reclaim was moved up in time. What was the original start time for the project and why was it actually moved up?
Just going off memory here, I don't have the detail in front of me. So I believe the start time was roughly anticipated, but it was thought that there'd be a longer process to remove the waste. As it was, the contractor essentially assembled a lot more equipment and manpower to be able to get the work done a lot faster. From memory, I think it was going to take 2 years or a bit over, and ended up taking a little bit less than that.
The overall timing we were looking at was the Palmerston landfill has a resource consent with it, and with any resource consent they expire. The likelihood of renewing that consent was going to be difficult, so it was definitely trying to get the project within that time frame where we could at least remove any material and put it into our own landfill, because the alternative was then trucking it down to Southland to the landfill down there would have been probably the only other option.
Yes, I do think from memory this was a situation where we allowed a fairly long window of time for the contractor to be able to do the work so that they could place their resources where they needed to try to make it as cost effective as possible. As it was, Fulton Hogan started a lot earlier than what we probably thought they would have.
So we've got a couple of questions just around rock armouring. Is the rock armouring that's already been installed actually working against erosion? And then someone also asked, does council have any indication to the costs of, or to the millions that are required on an annual basis just to protect this short stretch of coastline? I think that's included in our consultation document.
Yeah, and when you answer that, and I know people make references to the breakwater and the tetrapods and so on as to why aren't we using those? So do you want to throw that into the answer as well?
Yep, absolutely. So we do rock armouring in pockets where the road does become highly threatened, essentially. We've got a little bit of a budget that sits there and accumulates each year, and essentially when the road becomes threatened, we then go in and spend the money that we need to ensure that the road remains open. That is until obviously the road becomes threatened along its entire length, where the accumulated budget that we're putting aside isn't sufficient to be able to do all of the armouring that we need to. Certainly the pockets where we have done some work have worked as far as erosion, but there's a well-known issue that occurs when you do some rock armouring in an isolated location. It tends to be the case that that rock armouring then breaks up the wave energy and you end up with erosion around where you've undertaken the erosion. So in some cases it can exacerbate further erosion around those sites. So yes, it has worked, but in the same token, it is a losing battle that we're fighting. Yeah.
And use of tetrapods in either those places or the breakwater.
Yep.
Versus the rock that we.
It definitely possible. The rock is far less expensive than tetrapods have been historically. I think tetrapods work remarkably well at the breakwater because they kind of lock in all of the rock that we've got and ensure that the rock doesn't get sucked back out to sea. We're kind of in a little bit of a different situation at Beach Road in terms of the mechanism for erosion than what we are at the breakwater. So they may not be as suitable for Beach Road North as what they would be for the breakwater.
Yeah, either way you need a hell of a lot of them.
You do, you do, yes. Yep. We're looking at a 2.8 kilometre stretch of road. It's a lot of tetrapods.
Yeah, I think a lot of, you may see that in major metropolitan areas, but not so much in rural New Zealand.
So we still have quite a number of questions coming through and aware of time, but if you're happy to keep going for a bit longer, we still have a decent number of people online, so if you're happy to carry on for a wee while.
Right, we'll try and keep it as brief as possible.
Sure. So we've got a question. The Kakanui to Wainakarua river mouth section is obviously under serious threat as well. Are there any future plans regarding closure or possible mitigation to prevent the closure of this section?
I don't think there's a easily accessed alternative routes. So certainly that's been part of the formation of the policy around managed retreat, and it's in the past where we've looked at that, particularly from the sea through to Wainakarua, that area is looked at basically moving the road inland because we've got a situation there where it's not actually the sea erosion, it's the river eroding the very high cliff that's there. So there's some different issues and so on, but one of the things that we're very mindful of is that needing to keep access through to properties, and we can't. Well, I don't think we can morally leave anyone marooned as far as a property becoming landlocked. So we look at what the options are that's still going to make sure there's connections for everyone.
So I'm not sure if you're able to answer, how far inland along Beach Road does the main sewer line and water main to Kakanui sit from the road?
Yep. It's approximately 20 metres inland from Beach Road North.
Thanks.
One of the tools that people can use is Canterbury Maps. So we have not only Google Earth, but we have Canterbury Maps, which also has our infrastructure around water pipes and so forth that you can view on there. So if people want to look at that type of thing, just a wee shout out. It's a higher definition than Google Earth. Canterbury Maps viewer, go online, have a look at it.
Thank you. That's exciting. Okay, so once Kiwi Concrete relocate to the new road metals yard, would that mean that Regina Lane pump station will leapfrog the Orwell Street pump station as being threatened when you look at current aerial images?
There's certainly been some protection done by Road Metals previously and Kiwi Concrete as well, and that has delayed things. But I mean, one of the main reasons that Road Metals moved was they couldn't see, any point in just continuing to try and protect that area. And you do notice in that area that where they're protected it's kept the sea at bay, but around that area has been affected by that transfer of energy to those other bits. Josh is just quickly looking at
I am just quickly looking at the
Canterbury
aerials. Yes.
to see what Kiwi Concrete looks like there.
Yeah. So the analysis that we've done of the erosion potential ones does look as though Orwell Street is the site that is most likely in the shortest term to be impacted. Regina Lane is one where in time it's quite possible, if there isn't protection that's undertaken there, that it will become threatened, but isn't the most pressing of issues.
Thanks for that. So we've got just a few more questions online, and we've so the sea won't stop. Some mitigation measures could be undertaken by controlled disposal of hardfill along the coastline. An example of this could be leftover concrete from Kiwi Concrete or gravels from excavation. There are less inflows of gravels due to damming of rivers and irrigation takeoff, so more a statement than a question. Have you got any comment to that?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be enough leftover concrete. Would be one of the things that, to be quite honest, it's going to take quite a large amount. And whether it's demolition concrete, there's always, increasingly, there is much more scrutiny on those for contaminants and so forth that go in, can be in amongst demolition material. So it's not an easy one. The reality is probably, look to Josh for this, but it's probably easier, even though it costs to buy rock, to actually put virgin rock in there.
Yep. With the environmental controls that we need to go through, and the consents that we need to get to be able to undertake rock armouring using a known source, such as rock that's been mined specifically for the purpose, is easier in many ways. I know that there are some people that are doing some isolated armouring work using waste concrete and the likes, and I think that works in isolated sections. But when we're looking at needing to do like a 2.8 kilometre section of rock, it's really something that you want to get in and get it done rather than doing it in little sections over time, because it can lead to further erosion where you haven't armoured that area. Just that little issue where it does come in and swing around the point where you've done your armouring. With respect to difficulty in sourcing gravel from creeks and rivers, that is something that we are trying to work with the Targa Regional Council and Environment Canterbury on, in collaboration with other private companies such as Road Metals, just because they've been mentioned. I think everyone's realising, both from a aggregate source perspective for our unsealed road grading, as well as some of these other construction projects, that some of the limitations that we're putting on sourcing gravel from rivers is really having a detrimental effect on both the rivers and flooding potential, but also the costs for a lot of the work that we do need to undertake on our infrastructure.
So we've just got two more questions, probably one slightly related to that, and related to an earlier question that came through regarding designating the coastal road as significant natural area. Somebody's asked what input could we expect from Otago Regional Council on that, because they do feel it is significant part. The first archaeological site in New Zealand is along that road, Any comment from how Otago Regional Council would be supportive or involved?
If they were to do anything, they could provide funding, but they would rate the area that benefits from it. So there hasn't been much point getting them to do some of those things, because it ends up that it comes from a smaller rating base than what we would even be able to do. So it's a challenge. They've got some responsibilities, but not around protection, unless it's one of their ports or whatever that, like the Port of Otago, that they look after.
And so I think we've answered most of the questions, with just one lucky last there. Hopefully I have covered all of them. If council, and this is probably a forward-thinking one, if council decide not to reinstate Beach Road, what are council going to do at the Omo Road State Highway 1 intersection?
At the which road, sorry?
The Owamoa Road State Highway 1 intersection. So I think that's up near the junction, is it? So I guess that's where a lot of traffic flow is heading, if I'm understanding the question there correctly that's been put through. Obviously a lot of traffic goes out to Kakanui along Owamoa Road. If they don't reinstate that I guess suggestion of additional traffic.
Yeah, the primary alternate route would be through Thousand Acre rather than necessarily along Orwell Road. Previously we have applied to and were successful in achieving some funding from NZTA to install a roundabout at that particular intersection, the Elmore Road and the Highway 1. We saw that even without directing all of the traffic away from Beach Road, there were already some issues with additional development in that area, and traffic flow was being impeded. Unfortunately, that funding didn't progress, and the new government came in and put a stop to a few of the projects that we'd had some approval for. So I suppose the issue of efficiency of the roading network would be one that NZTA would have to deal with, rather than necessarily one that council would have to deal with. They would have to work very, very closely with them on that. But I think the primary alternate route, if Beach Road wasn't open, would be Thousand Acre Road rather than necessarily along Almel Road, which makes a lot of sense given there's a number of residential properties along Almel Road. Increasing the number of vehicles moving through those spaces, particularly where the speeds are slower, doesn't do much for road safety.
Yeah, there was a very good plan that was created by Mike Harrison, I believe, for the junction, which involved having an elongated roundabout, essentially, that allowed much freer traffic movement in and out around that particular area, because it's always been a complicated area. And one of the benefits would be that it actually would encourage more people perhaps to go off the highway and head down Wansbeck Street into our lower part of Oamaru, the Victoria area, etc. So that's the bit that we were looking for funding for, but it didn't happen. So it's a plan that's sitting there, and it could be re-looked at some stage. Well,
that's a lucky last.
So, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's quarter past 8, so we took it slightly longer, but covered a range of different questions as well. So thanks very much for everyone who's contributed to that. Please look out for the consultation document. There's going to be a summary of that, I think, as a wraparound to next week's Oamaru Mail. No? Week after. I'm getting instructions, visual instructions over here. Shakings of head. So that's going to be 2 editions in the future. So look for that, but also look on the council website and the council Facebook page for links to the information. We do look forward to people making submissions and giving us feedback on a range of issues such as we've talked about tonight, and so many more. We'll be doing another Facebook Live session next week, and it's going to be on things like community housing and Airbnbs and a number of other things. So stay tuned. Come back in a week's time. I don't think I'll be on that one. We've got one of the councillors doing that, so we look forward to you joining us again and giving us more questions. Thanks very much.